Many folks don't really understand what they're getting into with cults. Some people may not even understand that it is a cult that they're engaging with. Do understand that your desires, even if they may be good ones, uh, will be exploited if you're coming from a place of trauma, if you are naive to cults, if you have fantasies, even if it's a utopia, they will be exploited. So that's what we're going to touch on today. People don't understand what they're worshiping. In some of the videos that folks would find on these channels, and by the way, a pattern, and it's important and beneficial that we learn to identify the patterns in these different icons and these personalities and these charismatic individuals, that we can identify the patterns. Perhaps can be the shortcut if perhaps we can just press pause a bit on our emotions and look at the patterns to keep us objective, so we can get more of a comprehension on what we're dealing with. Otherwise, our triggers, our traumas, our desires can blind us to what it is we're actually engaging with, right? So, some of the videos that folks are watching, people may have a different context. That's a distinction and a pattern. The context may be different, is likely going to be different for the person who is watching these videos. For example, there was a video put out by the cult uh, leader and the cult I experienced that was going on about, and who knows if they'll even take it down if they haven't taken it down already, about the Naga pair, right? Naga, Nagus. We get the root word and the play on words, and Nagus is actually a word. But the Naga pear, which is an avocado, it's a longer avocado that you can find in Central America. And it can be used in all kinds of dishes. It's a whole, fresh, unprocessed, a healthy food. But it's interesting how the cult leader connected that with the worship of the male organ, the PHALLUS, how that was connected. And quite often I noticed a pattern. A lot of times I'll be like, it would just be sort of like, why are they making that connection? I remember even communicating with someone who had experienced the cult as we were communicating. And they asked me the question, did I think that this cult member was controlling people with food? Now, I think that seems like something so simple or elementary, though upon self reflecting, this one of the human needs, it can be manipulated. Something as simple as food, something as simple, well, maybe not so simple, your esteem or your trauma. And keep in mind, the cult personality or the manipulator is very well aware of human psyche and human behavior, and how to trigger or elicit a trauma response, right? So one of the patterns you'll find with these cult members, if you go to if you're even able to engage them with questions, quite often they'll send a representative. But should they answer, and they do a presentation for the benefit of other onlookers as well as members of their cult, they will often answer the questions in riddles, rhetoric, and word salad. So there are a couple of links, all right, that are inside of the chat for a recent uh, video that has been posted. And something interesting to note, especially this can be particularly helpful for those adult parents of adults who are in cults, who are legal adults in cults. And I do comprehend that it can be very painful and very confusing, extremely traumatizing if you are the parent of someone who has an adult, a legal adult inside of a cult. They may not ever come out for various reasons. Uh, in touching in on people that are onlookers not understanding what they're getting into, those two clips at 3:23 and also at 4:10 to 4:13 in that particular video link. Uh, one of the a quote from there is that, and the handicapped children were their gods. So this is a quote from that video. So for the adult parents of adults who are in cults, it can be very confusing. You don't understand what the tie is that your adult child has into the cult. And it's definitely come from a trauma bond, a response. But a lot of the things, even onlookers may not understand until you get into the cult. And if you've in the cult, I can speak from experience. There are a lot of things you'll see that don't make sense. A lot of a story that is created, and there are things that you are worshiping and upholding that is dripped in, especially should you become isolated. And if you are allowed, like layers of an onion, closer and closer into the cult, certain things are not divulged to you until you have a certain level of trust and until you've sacrificed certain things. That is how you gain more entrance into the cult, not until you've demonstrated a level of investment and loyalty. So that is perhaps a big distinction in people that are looking on videos. There is perhaps a context that is harder for you to grasp because if you have not had interaction inside of a cult, and if you haven't lived in it, um, there are many things, the context you may not be able to control, to discern. It is usually the cult leader who is controlling the context. For example, what is a cult? They'll make a play on words, cult, culture, using different things and trigger points, or to trigger you emotionally or to trigger your trauma, to get you in your mind to justify things that you see that don't make sense, or that's tapping you on your shoulder in terms of your moral compass, or things that you are giving over power or authority for decision making in your life, you're giving over to other people. Your common sense wouldn't lead you to do that, though your dreams of a utopia would have you give over authority, have you second guessing yourself. You give it over to another leader because they have more authority, more experience. Basically, you're just surrendering your decision making process. Once you do that, as in with any other uh, organization or cult or something that asks you to seek um, decision making or authority outside of yourself and your own common sense, that is coming from somewhere. That is a distinct pattern of manipulation. Anything that would have you second guess your own common sense and what you see before you, what your intuition is telling you is something that is so foreign or so just off, that is a manipulation. So the cult leader or the manipulator or the pimp, they count on you being traumatized. They count on you being in a precarious situation or life crisis. They count on you having a level of ignorance and naivete. They understand very much if your eyes are green, right? If you're not familiar. So in that case, for example, in the timestamp, that little, it's a lot of little details. This gentleman mentioned that the handicapped children were considered their gods. So this is definitely not to poke anything at someone who is differently abled or who is born differently or is shaped differently. Yet do understand that a cult leader will paint an entire narrative. They will paint an entire narrative with a big part of the goal being to, and this is also for the people, the members in the cult. Many of the members, children of the cult leader, many people have been born into a cult. They have a total different frame of reference and experience. They don't know anything but the cult. They don't know anything but the father or mother figures. They may not even know the full history of the different quote unquote parents and their origins if you have been born into a cult. That is all that you know. So it's not about making them necessarily wrong or bad. It's really about using our discernment and our critical thinking skills. Somebody born into a cult doesn't know any better. Someone who is not familiar with the workings of a cult. I'm a grown adult, not dumb by any means, decently read, but I had no idea of what a narcissist or a cult was. Had heard loosely of Jim Jones, but I didn't know a lot of the details and the facts. And when I left and I did extensive research, I was actually horrified, right? And I experienced a cult with some family members. Uh, greetings, greetings. So I'm just making this note. I don't often come on this channel, and because of the current climate, I've come to terms with a lot of people will continue to be drawn into cults because of trauma, because of escapism. And it is understandable the tremendous amounts of economic stress, the tremendous amount of people that have been their body temples, their reproductive organs at young ages have been mishandled by family members within their own community, economically stressed. There's just such a level of stress and worry. These are basic things that are manipulated with little drips and drops of truth. And we can have a tendency, and it is understandable culturally, why we will lean so heavily on mysticism, astrology, and religion in lieu of skills, understanding communication skills, understanding the brain, understanding the human psyche and its triggers. We're actually quite often manipulated or appeased with religion and rituals more so than our common sense. And it is understandable. So I'm not under any illusion that I'm here to save the world. It has been a matter of time. It has been consistent. It has been consistent the amount of things that have come to the surface, the patterns have that have come to the surface. And it is understandable the good things or the positive things about any culture, but in particular as an Afro person, um, about our culture that we hold on to ground us, that we seek for to ground us. That makes perfect sense. But to acknowledge and to come to terms with, regardless of the packaging, manipulation comes in every color, package, and culture under the sun as human beings. And it's easy for us to be in denial about that. So many people that come from a cult are not usually willing to speak out, because when you come out, you're usually so traumatized you can't believe if you're able to get out. Um, you're still maybe just totally confused about what it is that you went through. You know something is off. The level of investment, restabilizing yourself after investing so much time, resources, and emotions into the cult, it is quite traumatizing. When I asked a question to a cult leader about some younger people, a younger person in particular, that was brought into the cult, a younger woman, and I was asking, I wasn't sure who this person was mated to, and there were some things that the longer I was in it, it were being revealed that seemed off to me. So, or I just was unclear. It seemed off and unclear, and I asked a question about. And I was told by one of the senior female advisors, one of the wives, not wife on paper, but one of the wives. It was a polygamous situation. And the cult leader, I was told that people from the outside of the cult, have a pornographic mind and wouldn't be able to understand. Well, I said, try me. I'm eager to understand because I'm coming here uh, putting it all out on the table, risking a lot with my family member. And I want to understand. And just that, I was told that I would have a pornographic mind basically because I'm from the outside. And I suppose I wasn't thoroughly indoctrinated enough. Perhaps I didn't have enough common sense because of my exposure. And it's things like that. There were so many over time distinct moments where I just could not deny something was off. It just felt very uneasy in my intuition that I couldn't make sense of. Logically, okay, there's a lot of um, pornographic content outside of the cult. But then I could also, within my own common sense, know as much as I like the environment and the tropical environment, the fruits and vegetables in the garden, I know in my common sense that was only able to vet people to a certain extent, right? This cult leader was a different age, um, a whole nother generation than I. So it really takes something to vet someone. And usually today, vetting, many people are limited to the internet, right? You're lucky if you can find certain things on the internet. If a cult personality is savvy enough, they know how to cover their tracks. Cult leaders and icons, they take notes from other con people who have come before them so they can really be very, very savvy. And you may even have more access to be able to research in the United States. When you leave another country, it is even more challenging to track and trace who it is that you're dealing with. I've seen several individuals from different cults in different parts of Central America. And then I would go online, I would see that, wow, people in the States have no idea of what it is that they're looking at. So some of the videos that you see that are orchestrated because we love stories and graphics and the fantasy of being in a tropical environment is very appealing. If you're on a busy subway um, inside of New York City or another city in an urban area and you're hustling, bustling, there's an appeal to something else, but you don't understand what you're getting into, the cost of living. You don't understand the way they resolve conflict. You don't understand what's going on legally. You don't even know people's legal names in these other environments. So you will be pandered to. You will be some key words, particularly for young people, pandering, right? Look it up. Somebody telling you what it is that you want to hear. This person, distinction, understanding already at the outset of a communication what it is that you want to hear, because likely you have been audited, right? You have been scanned, how you communicate, what your issues are. Someone, it is easy for a religious personality, a religious figure, a political person to already understand what it is that you're looking for and to orchestrate their speech or their communication according to what it is that you want to hear to make yourself feel better. It's interesting, and I think it's somewhat unfortunate, though it is what it is, that many of us, and I can also relate to this, will think that and this taps into our ego, can think that we're so smart. Or a young person may think that they're smart in the context that um, this elite circle that we have, we eat healthier than the rest of them, or our behavior is better than the rest of them. Look how they're going to jobs, or look how they're overweight, or they have acne, look how they have arguments, and you're thinking that you're quote unquote smart in that context, that you've come across some information that is so much better. It's even elitist to a certain degree, and it's so much of a different way of life than other people, only to later discover, after you're so deeply isolated and indoctrinated into the cult, that many of the human behaviors are the same. Many of the same. Those are some of the things that I discovered or I became aware of. Again, fruits and vegetables, gardening. You don't need a cult leader to tell you to eat healthy, right? Though uh, the way that many of us are eating to self-soothe and self-comfort, right, is this is one of the things that the cult leader, the manipulator, is understanding. They're watching every single nuance about you to see what your triggers are. And again, the people that are born into the cult, they don't have another frame of reference. Many people also have different appetites, some of them due to trauma, some of it due to their character makeup. Many of these things you'll likely not be able to discern until you're deeply engrossed into the cult. There are young people that want to prove their family members or society to prove them wrong because you think that you have found something. And again, this is the area I can relate. You think you found something so special, something so different than what you're seeing on the internet, something that seems to represent family values. Who doesn't want that? And so um, you really take a stance to defend something that you haven't vetted, that you don't know personally, or that you have been barely introduced to on the surface. And you can watch large numbers of people attaching themselves to personalities, cult personalities online. Sometimes they're their age or closer to their age. So they're bonding on that. This person represents because they're my age or because they're speaking the language of hip hop, music, and rhythms that I relate to. There's a bond somewhere that you're coming together on. But you don't know the rituals that are taking place behind the scenes. You don't know how people are engaging with their reproductive organs. You don't know how people are taking risks with their body temples. You don't know the levels and degrees of shame that people have that would allow them to stay into the cult. If they came into the cult with shame, looking to absolve themselves or get some comfort or affirmation from the shame of different things that they've gone into, that's a very strong, even a rational pull. Then if you couple that with coming into the cult, thinking you found some comfort from some mother figures or sister figures or an adult male parenting figure, and then you may not even realize that you start to engage in rituals or certain acts that you take part in, if that's the shaming of others or different types of rituals. These things become jogged inside of your memory. So they become things that are special to you that will play on your ego and make you feel more elitist and special where you didn't feel special before. On the outside, you were a traumatized individual. Perhaps you were someone that weren't really succeeding inside traditional school settings. Perhaps you're someone that has talents that weren't supported. Perhaps you have had parents that abandoned you. So these are things that you think you find solace and comfort in the cults. And these are, um, inside of the cult, um, one of the things that will be exploited and quote unquote acknowledged and put to use for the cult are people's talents. And so, um, talents are used to exploit and also distract, right? People with a nice body or basketball, that's one of the ways that cults, Jim Jones and the cult leader I experience, can find ways to draw young men, into a cult. Somebody can have a great singing ability, but what does that have to do with their decision making process, with them placing themselves and other people in harm's way? These talents, even if you look across the internet, someone's physical appearance, oh, and they're so made up, and that's beautiful. They have beautiful makeup, and they have beautiful singing ability, and have beautiful athletic ability that can throw us off and that can blindside us because it can be triggering in a soothing way. It can have us go into escapism rather than hold someone accountable or just to use our logic and discernment when it comes to assessing who and what we are dealing with. So, I hear your point, and that's understand. Somebody can have singing ability, but that doesn't mean they're not doing some underhanded, foul stuff, right? Inside of a cult or inside of a very controlling organization, quite often, the cult I experienced put out a lot of music. Most of the music was out of tune, and it was off. It was off and it was out of tune, right? People want to be validated. People want to be a star. Do you realize that is one of the main things that it exploited inside of a cult? If you're an artist, you have artistic ability. There's even something I would say that is in that quote unquote childlike part of us that has never had that validation, that craves for that that type of validation, right? So that is something that can be exploited. So I don't know the full context, but in any event, many of churches, for example, will use people's singing ability. When we are tuned into rhythms and sounds, they trigger something within us that is not necessarily negative, but the tone of the music is hypnotic and it's soothing. It can elicit different emotions. It is one of the ways we get open. It is one of the things, there's several things a lot of times that we are going to church or different religious organizations or rituals for, right? We're going for the music. We're going for quote unquote fellowship, but fellowship with what? Distinction. Shared activities don't mean shared values. People have the tendency to make the assumption that because you are attending a church together, or a mosque or a synagogue or a ritual, you're assuming that you may assume that you have shared values, or you may assume that you have the same level of experience or the same level of exposure. And in the case of cults, quite often people that are new or unfamiliar with the cults are wide, bright eyed, bushy tailed, very eager, and you may not understand the expressions on other people's face. It is not until years later or until you've been thoroughly indoctrinated into the cult that you understand you are all operating on a different context. So the point is, or one of the points that I'm making here is artistic ability, physical ability, and looks are manipulated all the time. They're misled to think that a person giving credit means that you're under the person's spell. Okay, I hear you. Um, if was so that spell, if you want to call it that, because I'm just sharing one person's experience. I'm not here to go back and forth with someone about their experience, because your experience or your context is yours. I can only share what I'm here to share today, and based on observation, what is common, the quote unquote spell, if we distinguish what a spell is in terms of being able to be influenced, I think that's what people may be reacting to, because what can be observed is that people's behavior and what they have done, what they're given a pass for, and not being held accountable to, pretty much a pattern is that people's behaviors and vetting them or investigating them is often overlooked. If they have a suit on, if they have a nice body, if they have lots of makeup on, if they have singing ability, we become desensitized or we romanticize who the individual is in front of us. We have a tendency to give them a pass. Um, yeah, and that can be, if we just look, that can be seen. So when there's a sense of urgency around sharing information, so that I would think that perhaps people's priority is sharing information so people can distinguish the patterns of cults and manipulators. And quite often, what is put in front is what will manipulate people or to get them to drop their discernment. What is often being triggered is something to get you to surrender your discernment, is what is going to trigger you to drop your defenses for vetting somebody, doing a thorough investigation before you give someone authority, or for you think, well, that makes sense what they're saying. Sometimes it can be so automatic that you may not realize that, and this can happen for any human being, that you are drawn to people because you have the same skin tone, you come from the same neighborhood, you have shared different experiences. There are different things that can have us automatically drop our discernment and our vetting. And so there is a sense, there are those that feel a sense of urgency around sharing the patterns of what has people drop their discernment, what has people drop their common sense, what would have people, and this is not limited to cults, all kinds of organizations or quote unquote leaders, what has humans drop and overlook the behavior, the characteristics, who these people are, that we can turn on the screen and they speak in a certain type of, with a certain type of voice inflection. You can put certain types of background music on. You can change the hairstyle, and these are things that have human beings, often many human traumatized human beings, drop our discernment. Mhm. Of course, of course. We can all say we like and dislike. So, yeah. So I know for what I'm sharing here is perhaps for somebody is doing research that has is prioritizing, or somebody that may be unaware, to draw the distinctions to the patterns to be watchful for. And I've come across very educated people, intellectually, that have numerous degrees. I've been aware and encountered people with double degrees and all types of resources that have been inside of cults. So it is very possible for someone to be highly intellectual, very well read. I've encountered professionals deeply involved into cults um, that have become impregnated. They gave up all of their resources. So anyone can be drawn into a cult. It's not hard today to manipulate people. So I think perhaps it's not just the intellect, it's understanding the human psyche. So this is just to say the rituals, some of the videos that people are looking at. I know there are some that I have been on the other end and on location with a lot of videos that have been scripted. Uh, and I have another context for what's being seen, having spoken to many of the cult uh, people that were involved in the cult that left, who I wonder where they disappeared to years later, that some reached out and contacted me. There was a whole nother context, and a lot more things were pieced together. Many of the within the cult, the communications can be very strained and controlled. People, grown adults included, are not allowed to speak to each other and to compare notes. And sometimes people, when they're just looking to get out of there, um, some of them don't even look back to compare notes. And so that's a lot of information that the average person on the outside would not be privy to. At this particular point in time, there are a few people that have come out to share their personal experience with cults. You can find them on YouTube. That's why this channel is called Cult Education. There have been numerous playlists out for years on all type of cults: black cults, white cults, Korean cults. It is a phenomenon, and we haven't often made these distinctions within the Black and the Afro community. I don't think that cults are going anywhere. I do think that now there's a lot more information. Cult leaders depend on you not having the time because people are in basic survival mode. They have to go to work, they have things to do. And some of these videos are so long. Sometimes there's so much drama that many people just don't have the time to tune in. And there can often be seen a lot of immaturity and a lot of triggering. So when we're triggered, we're not often able to hear or to discern. So in any event, the two links provide they provide, I think, some insight. And in particular, there may be some parents out there of adults, legal adults in cults that I am aware of, and I've had this experience and spoken to numerous parents of adults, older adults, and young adults that are now of legal age inside cults. And unless you've experienced that, which I have, that is a very painful um, uh, a place of anguish to be in because you can't put your finger on it. Um, you want your child, your adult child, to be okay and healthy. You wonder if they're going to be mentally stable. There are a lot of distinctions that people just that are looking on the internet from the outside in may not be able to make. And so, where did those parents of adults and cults, where do they go to have a conversation? It is a very that is very traumatizing in and of itself. The cult leader will also use uh, those parents and the siblings to bring other people into cults. So somebody that has adult um, children into cults, they can feel a lot of shame around having children in cults, and people around them may not understand. Um, Tack on to this if you are in another country internationally, right? As we have more people, as I've also come in contact with many people traveling internationally, people are able to fly underneath the radar in a whole nother way overseas. This is what people in the States may not be privy to. So folks don't understand what they're getting into. Some of the things that we're so enamored with, the outfits, the red, gold, and green, the white, the draping, the women all in similar outfits, and what appears like, people standing next to banana trees and so on in community. A lot of it that sounds great. It sounds positive, but these are human beings quite often we're putting up on a pedestal without a frame of reference. Usually, women and children will be put out front to paint a picture, again, to get people to drop their defenses. And many cults will count on the runoff, right? For people, because there's still that drive for validation and seeking community, which in and of itself is not wrong. But when folks find, okay, this cult wasn't hitting it, so let me see if I can find another group, right? One of the patterns that can be observed is cult hopping, right? Especially from a lot of younger people. So I just want to encourage people to keep their thinking caps on, to use their discernment. Again, for the adult members in the cults, if you're able to, um, I invite you to check out the two clips, right? And to listen carefully, perhaps press pause on being reactionary and to react to something that you think you know, and listen very carefully to the details. That one comment, again, for the parents of adults inside of cults, right? Especially that are overseas. Um, Understand your children or your adult children aren't able to have access to the internet as you do to do research. They're limited and what kinds of research they can do. Everything goes through a chain of command inside the cult. You're limited in terms, and you're constantly watched in terms of what you can look at on the internet, what you have access to. And you're usually very busy working in the garden or with family duties. Now that if impregnated, folks inside of the cult, is just a lot that the people inside of a cult that they're limited to in terms of cross-referencing and doing their research. So I'm inviting you all to keep your thinking caps on, to use your discernment. Check out those two clips. I know folks only have but so much time to research because there's life to be lived, but also do understand the cult leaders count on your not having time to pay attention to the details, or quite often you may not be able to connect the dots. A lot of these cult people all coming off the same vein. If people can notice, the connection with Mr. York, the cult leader that I observed. I had a lot. I had all of his books and tapes. I even had quite a few of them that were out of print. If any of the parents out there of these adults inside cults, even if you were to listen to a lot of these nuances and you're overseas, you likely would not know who Mr. So and so York is, who is inside, who is in jail for many counts of violating children and some of his family members. So there's a lot that people outside are just not privy to, and the cult leaders they count on your level of ignorance. There's so much you would have to do that maybe you just don't have the time to connect the dots, but there are distinct patterns of exploitation. There's a distinct pattern of how men are drawn in. And what personalities are targeted, particular age groups. And if the ages are older, there's a particular pattern. Many don't have the time to go through that. Um, and again, this is for those adults. This may explain some of what you're looking at and to give you insight into if you've been invited onto the land. Because a lot of times I saw you parents, I sat on the other side as you were coming in, and I had a whole nother frame of reference. I can think of numerous adults, those few that were invited in. I sat on another side inside watching you as you came in, and I had been in meetings, and there had been meetings where I heard other parents talked about constantly. So I have a different frame of reference based on experience. This is not a recording. This is not a recording. I'm speaking live. Again, this goes so people make lots of assumptions. This is not a recording, right? Yeah, and I don't choose to engage. I engage, but so much. I keep it limited because there's something to engaging with the chat that is a dynamic that that's not the greatest. when it comes to dealing online. So it is each of our, no, it's not recording, right? And we have to be very, very, very careful. That's just one teeny tiny example. Yeah, sometimes folks get upset when women don't engage a certain kind of way on the internet. And so folks will go into having like a temper tantrum or they get upset. This is the internet. You're engaging with strangers that you don't know. If you are on the receiving end of cult behavior, if you are ignorant or you're a nice person or not, you will still have to deal with the consequences of your decisions, right? If I have locks and I have red, gold, and green, people make assumptions. We are a people. We have a tendency to think, make assumptions about people. And that gets us, and there's a reason why. And we wind up getting into things that we just had not bargained for. So, this is definitely also for the benefit of parents who are the parents of adults, legal adults inside of cults. I could write a book. I don't know that I want to uh, devote that kind of time. I've thought of it before. I've just sat back and allowed things to run its course, which it has. By now, people can see distinct patterns, even of a lot of the channels that have come on that was supposed to be dispelling a lot of these cults, and a lot of it all went left. So I've seen a lot of this early on. So I don't um, have the energy or the desire to engage like that. I have a garden, I have other responsibilities. Some folks will always be drawn into cults or looking for something, and that's understandable. But there are folks that are going to get into a lot of stuff because they may not have a frame of reference for how to process and manage trauma. Numerous videos previously on its page, and I'm sure somewhere, community section or somewhere, I've made some references for um, mental health resources. Some of them are online and free for some people. There's some young people that may not have the money or the wherewithal for ways to develop communication skills, to process trauma, to make distinctions of things that have happened to them. So, when those things are lacking, many folks without a frame of reference or experience will go to cults, religion, and astrology for things that are very, very practical. There are things that can be solved practically, right? And so, quite often, folks will go from trying to find reasons and to process what has happened to them. People are looking for comfort. People are looking for fathering, mothering figures. That's not wrong, but it leaves many people vulnerable to being exploited, even grown adults. Even grown adults. So, I invite you to keep your thinking caps on to do your research. I have a lot of compassion for the parents of adult members in cults. I've spoken to numerous of them. I've communicated with people who have had their partners in cults. I've experienced it personally. I would never want to intend harm on any of the people, especially children and young people that have been born into cults. But not but, and there's enough time that has gone by for enough of the patterns to come to the surface, whether you're overseas or if you are in the States. Uh, though perhaps in our quiet moments we can maybe reflect on what are the ways in which I'm being pandered to, right? Um, are there any ways that I allow myself to be pandered to in order to be comforted? Is there any way that I'm allowing myself to be pandered to because it makes me feel better, but it's not logical, or it's not having me to use my common sense, or perhaps just because I can't articulate, I don't have a frame of reference, should I second guess my intuition telling me something that's off? Or perhaps we also underestimate the desire of many human beings, many of us, to want to belong to something, which can also have us be exploited as we're part of something that is elite. That's another one of the cult techniques. So there's a lot of information out there. It's our personal responsibility to educate ourselves, whether you're a nice person or not. Certain decisions will have to live with the results. And I see many young people or younger people are dealing with the results of decisions made. And quite often you'll have to deal with that on your own, right? You'll have to deal with the consequences whether you think you're a nice person or not. So, sending you all some warm, positive vibrations. Keep your thinking caps on.